Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thorne had been declared dead by a world that no longer had a use for him, only to come home and find his wife celebrating a new life built upon his grave. The hiss of the bus's air brakes was a sound of finality, a sigh of compressed air releasing him back into a life he had only seen in dog-eared photographs for 2 years. Marcus Thorne stepped onto the wet asphalt of the depot, the cool, damp air of coastal Oregon a shock to a system conditioned by the dry, searing heat of the Hindu Kush. It smelled of rain, pine, and diesel fumes, the perfume of home. A scent he'd conjured in his mind 1,000 times in the dust-choked hell of his deployment. He slung the heavy canvas duffel over his shoulder. It felt impossibly light compared to the 80-pound pack he was used to, yet the weight of it seemed to settle deeper, pulling not on his muscles but on his soul. Inside were 2 years of a life lived on the knife's edge, a ghost haunting the man who now stood under the gray, weeping sky. He had told no one he was coming. Not the Navy, not his command who thought he was still on a psych hold at Landstuhl, and certainly not Elena. The surprise was the thing. He imagined her face, the slow dawn of recognition, the tears, the collapse into his arms. He imagined holding his daughter, Lily, who would be 12 now, a little woman. The thought was an anchor in the storm of his return. The walk was only a mile. He chose it over a taxi, wanting to feel the ground of his town under his boots, to reacquaint himself with the geography of his own life. The quiet streets of his neighborhood were a stark contrast to the kinetic, ever-present threat of a combat zone. Here, the only potential dangers were a cracked sidewalk or a barking terrier behind a picket fence. He catalogued the familiar sights: the Hendersons peeling paint, the oak tree with the broken limb from the last ice storm, the immaculate garden of Mrs. Gable. Nothing had changed. It was a perfect, preserved diorama of the life he'd fought to protect. He felt a strange calm settle over him. The hypervigilance of the field operator began to recede, replaced by the simple anticipation of a husband and father. Every step was a step away from the man he had been forced to become, and a step closer to the man he was. His house appeared at the end of the block, a modest 2-story colonial with blue shutters. His home. A wave of profound relief washed over him, so potent it almost buckled his knees. He was here. He was safe. He was home. But something was wrong. His tactical brain, the part that never truly slept, flagged the anomalies before his conscious mind could process them. Too many cars parked along the curb. Not beaters, but nice sedans and SUVs. And music. Faint, but definitely music, laced with the murmur of happy voices. On a Tuesday afternoon. He slowed his pace, his easy stride shifting into a cautious, measured approach. His hand, of its own accord, went to his hip where a sidearm should have been. The lawn was perfect, too perfect. It had the uniform, cross-hatched lines of a professional landscaping service, not the slightly shaggy, uneven job he and his old pushmower always managed. He moved up the driveway, sticking to the shadows cast by the neighbor's towering fir tree. Habit. He reached the front porch and saw the door was slightly ajar, propped open by a small rubber wedge. An open invitation. A fatal mistake in another context. Here, it was just strange. He slipped inside, silent as a wraith. The duffel bag came off his shoulder, and he set it down without a sound. His senses went into overdrive, painting a picture of the scene. The house smelled of perfume, baked goods, and something else, a floral scent. Lilies. The irony was a bitter pill. The interior was different. The walls were a new color, a soft gray instead of the eggshell white he remembered. New photos hung on the wall of the entryway. One showed Lily on a beach, smiling, squinting into the sun. She looked older, happier than he'd seen her in a long time. Next to her was Elena. And next to Elena was another man. Marcus froze, his eyes locked on the image. The man was familiar. David Prescott. A friend from high school, a widower whose wife had died of cancer a few years back. In the photo, his arm was around Elena's waist. It was a comfortable, proprietary gesture. A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into Marcus's veins. This was not a welcome home party. This was something else. He moved deeper into the house, his soft-soled boots making no sound on the new hardwood floors that had replaced their old, scuffed laminate. He followed the sound of the voices, which grew louder as he neared the back of the house. They were coming from the backyard. He stopped at the sliding glass door that led to the patio. Through the pristine glass, the scene unfolded like a silent movie of his own personal apocalypse. The patio was decorated with white streamers and balloons. About 20 people were gathered, chatting, laughing, holding champagne flutes. His daughter, Lily, was there, wearing a pale yellow dress, her hair done up in a way he'd never seen. She stood beside Elena. And Elena, she was breathtaking. She wore a simple, elegant white sundress, her dark hair pinned up with a white flower. She was radiant, glowing with a happiness that punched the air from Marcus's lungs. Standing beside her, holding her hand, was David Prescott. He wore a crisp blue suit, his smile easy and confident. On a small, draped table sat a two-tiered cake topped with a simple, elegant bride and groom. Someone tapped a glass. An older man Marcus didn't recognize raised his flute. A toast! The man's voice carried through the slightly open door. To Elena and David. It's been a long and difficult road for you both, but to see you find this happiness together, it's a blessing. To a new life, a new beginning. The crowd echoed the toast. To Elena and David. The world stopped turning. The sounds of the party dissolved into a dull, rushing roar, like the inside of a seashell. The blood in his veins turned to slush. Elena wasn't his anymore. She wasn't waiting. She had moved on. She had remarried. He felt the strength drained from his body. His hand, numb and useless, lost its grip on the doorframe. He stumbled back, a silent, guttural cry trapped in his throat. This wasn't a homecoming. It was an exhumation. He was the body at the funeral, the ghost at the feast. His training kicked in, a cold, logical override to the emotional detonation in his chest. A compromised position. An unwinnable engagement. The primary objective was to fall back, reassess, gather intel. He would not create a scene. He would not destroy her happiness, even if it was built on the mistaken belief of his death. He retreated. Backing away from the door, he snatched his duffel bag from the floor and slipped out the front door as silently as he had entered. The cool rain had started again, and he didn't even feel it on his face. He walked away from his home, from his life, a dead man walking in a world that had already buried him. There was only one place to go. One person who might have answers without judgment. He walked through the rain-slicked streets, his mind a white noise storm of shock and grief, until he stood before the heavy oak doors of St. Jude's Catholic Church. He found Father Michael in the rectory, reading under a small lamp, the smell of old books and brewing tea filling the air. The priest looked up as Marcus entered, his eyes widening first in confusion, then in utter, disbelieving shock. Marcus? The name was a whisper, a prayer. My God! It can't be! Marcus just stood there, dripping on the antique rug, the duffel bag a leaden weight at his side. He couldn't form words. He could only nod. Father Michael crossed himself, his face pale. He rose slowly and guided Marcus to a worn leather chair. He didn't ask questions, not at first. He just made a cup of tea with trembling hands and placed it in front of Marcus, whose own hands were too unsteady to lift it. Finally, the priest sat opposite him. The Navy told us you were gone, son. A helicopter crashed in the Karangal. They searched for weeks. No survivors, no remains recovered. They declared you killed in action over a year ago. The words were delivered softly, but they landed like hammer blows. Killed in action. A tidy, clinical phrase to describe the obliteration of a man's existence. We had a memorial service for you. Father Michael continued, his voice thick with sorrow. Here. The church was full. The entire town came to honor you. Elena, my boy, she was shattered. Utterly broken. Lily, too. It was a terrible, terrible time. Marcus stared into the swirling steam of his tea, the story washing over him. He had been a prisoner for 6 months after the crash, held in a hole in the ground by insurgents who eventually grew tired of him and sold him to a different faction. His escape had been a bloody, desperate miracle, followed by months of navigating hostile territory to get to a friendly outpost. All that time, fighting to get home, his home had been dismantling itself, piece by piece. David Prescott was there for her, the priest said, choosing his words carefully. His own wife, you remember, passed from the cancer. He understood grief. He was just a friend at first. He helped with the house, made sure Lily got to school. He was just there. A good man, Marcus. A steady hand in the storm. Marcus finally found his voice, a raw, ragged thing. They got married. Today. Father Michael's shoulders slumped. He looked 100 years old. Yes. I officiated the service this morning. A small, private affair. They wanted to do the reception at the house. Elena said, she said it felt right. To start a new life in the place where she'd had so much love before. The priest looked at him, his eyes filled with a deep, aching pity. She mourned you, Marcus. She loved you. She never, ever would have moved on if she thought for 1 second you were alive. You must believe that. He did. That was the most agonizing part. There was no villain in this story. No betrayal. There was only tragedy, layered upon tragedy. Elena wasn't an adulterer, she was a widow. David wasn't a thief, he was a lifeboat. And Marcus? Marcus was a ghost, returned to haunt a world that had learned to live without him. The anger he'd expected to feel, the white-hot rage of the wronged husband, it never came. In its place was a vast, hollow emptiness. A crater where his life used to be. The life he had dreamed of, the anchor that had kept him sane through torture and starvation, was an illusion. It was gone. It had died with him a year ago, and he was just now attending the funeral. He sat in the silence of the rectory for a long time, the priest watching him with compassionate eyes. The gears of his mind, the tactical, mission-oriented part, began to turn again. Stripping away the emotion, analyzing the objective. What was the mission now? His lifelong mission had been to protect his family. To keep Elena and Lily safe. What did that mean in this new, impossible reality? He could storm back there. Kick down the door, announce his resurrection, and watch as their new, fragile world shattered into a million pieces. He could reclaim his wife, his daughter, his house. He had the legal right. He had the moral right. But to what end? He would be destroying Elena's peace, the stability she had fought so hard to rebuild from the ashes of her grief. He would be traumatizing Lily all over again, forcing her to reconcile the father she mourned with the stranger who now stood before her. Was that protection? Or was it destruction? He looked at Father Michael. What do I do? The only thing you can do, my son, the priest said softly. Decide what mission you are on now. Is it to reclaim the past? Or is it to protect their future? The choice was stark, brutal, and clear. He had survived the enemy, survived the mountains, survived the unimaginable. But surviving this? It required a different kind of strength. It required letting go. His duty, his ultimate, final duty to the family he loved, was to protect them from the chaos of his own return. The man Elena had married was dead. That man died in a helicopter crash in the mountains of Afghanistan. The man who sat here now was someone else. A survivor. A ghost. And ghosts don't belong among the living. He would not go back to the party. He would not confront them tonight. He would let them have this one day of uncomplicated happiness. Tomorrow would be another matter. Tomorrow, the careful, painful work would have to begin. He spent the night in a cheap motel on the highway, the kind with thin walls and a flickering neon sign. He didn't sleep. He just stared at the ceiling, deconstructing his life, running threat assessments on his own heart. The next morning, he made a call. Hello? Elena's voice was thick with sleep and happiness. He almost hung up. His throat closed. Elena, he said. Just her name. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. He could hear her breathing quicken. "Who is this?" she whispered, but there was a tremor of impossible recognition in her voice. "It's Marcus." A sharp intake of breath. A muffled sound that might have been a sob or a gasp. "No," she breathed. "It can't be. You're gone." "I'm not," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. It was the only way he could get through it. "Meet me at the park by the marina. In an hour. Come alone." He hung up before she could respond. He was waiting on a bench overlooking the water when she arrived. She looked pale, her eyes wide with shock and fear. The glow from yesterday was gone, replaced by a terrible, haunted fragility. She looked at him as if he were an apparition. "It's really you," she whispered, not moving closer. "It's me," he confirmed. The dam broke. She began to weep, deep, silent, shoulder-shaking sobs of grief and shock and a confusion so profound it was painful to watch. He didn't go to her, didn't comfort her. He wasn't her husband anymore. He had no right. When the tears subsided, they talked. He told her a sanitized version of his story, the crash, the capture, the escape. She told him hers, the devastating visit from the Navy officers, the year of hollow hope, the finality of the declaration of death, the slow, painful process of rebuilding a life with David's help. "He's a good man, Marcus," she said, her voice pleading. "He loves Lily. He loves me. He helped me learn how to breathe again." "I know," Marcus said, and he meant it. "I saw it. Yesterday." Her face crumpled with a fresh wave of pain. "You were there? You saw? I saw that you were happy," he said. "I saw that Lily was happy. That's all I ever wanted." He finally looked at her, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. The man she had loved looked out from behind a stranger's face. "The man you married, Lena, he didn't make it home. He died in those mountains. I'm what's left. And what's left isn't going to destroy the peace you've found." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by a new, more terrible grief. The grief of a choice that had no right answer. "What about Lily?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "She needs to know I'm alive," he said. "But she also needs to know her life isn't going to be torn apart. She has a father in David. I'm not going to take that from him. Or from her." It was the hardest conversation of his life. A quiet, brutal negotiation of a future that had no precedent. By the end, an understanding was reached. He was not coming back. He would legally remain dead for now, giving them time. He would re-engage with the Navy, sort out his status, but he would do it from a distance. He met Lily a week later. The meeting was excruciating. She cried and clung to him, then pulled away, confused and angry. He tried to explain the unexplainable to a 12-year-old girl, that he was her father, but he couldn't be her dad, not in the way he was before. That he loved her enough to let her have the stable life she deserved. It was a wound that he knew would take years to heal, if ever. Months passed. The autumn rains gave way to the crisp chill of winter. Marcus found a small apartment on the other side of town, near the boatyards. He officially came back to life in the eyes of the United States Navy, a bureaucratic miracle that felt anticlimactic. He took a job at the marina, sanding hulls and varnishing teak, the simple, methodical labor a balm for his fractured mind. The rhythmic scrape of sandpaper on wood was a sound he could control. He joined a veterans support group that met in the basement of the VFW hall, run by a grizzled Vietnam tunnel rat who understood the nature of ghosts. Marcus didn't talk much, but he listened. He learned he wasn't the only one who had come home to a life that no longer fit. His new reality was quiet. It was sparse. It revolved around his weekly supervised visits with Lily in a neutral park, slowly, awkwardly building something new. He wasn't the father she ran to with good news, but he was the man who showed up, every single Saturday, rain or shine, to listen. He was building a new relationship, not on the ruins of the old one, but on fresh, unbroken ground. One afternoon, he was at the marina, applying a coat of varnish to the rail of an old sailboat. The sun was low over the water, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Lily. Just a picture of a science fair project, a volcano made of clay and baking soda, with a blue first place ribbon pinned to the base. Beneath it, a simple message: "We won. Thought you'd want to see." Marcus looked at the picture, then out at the calm, glassy water of the harbor. A slow smile spread across his face. It was small. It was quiet. It was 1,000 miles from the life he'd once had. But it was real. His old mission was over. The war was done. A new one had begun, to navigate these quiet waters, to be a father from a distance, to be a survivor. To finally, truly, come home.